This is episode 3 of Street Study, a YouTube series where I go through the works of different photographers who have inspired myself and countless others. I'm excited today to share the work of Ernst Haas. This wouldn't be the first time I've mentioned him and his work on this channel, but it only makes sense to do right by him and what he's meant to me as a photographer, because he's probably one of my all-time biggest inspirations, and I know a lot of other photographers share that same sentiment. He was one of the most pivotal photographers when it came to shooting in color, and his style and approach to street photography transcends generations. He's a true pioneer of color photography, and it's not an exaggeration to consider him one of the greatest photographers of all time. Today we'll be looking at one of his most popular books of his work, New York in Color, 1952 to 1962, produced by Prestel. If you're actually looking to get into buying photo books, I can't recommend this one enough. Such a quality book for the price. I think we often consider, photo books as being very expensive. And yes, that's true, and especially if you're buying many of them. But there's books like this that remind you that photo books can be pretty affordable. This one's only $30. It's always on sale. And the amount of work you get to dive into with this book is incredible. So much to learn from it, of course, so today we'll be looking through it and looking at some lessons we might be able to take from studying Haas's work. Born in Vienna, Ernst Haas picked up his first camera, a Rolleiflex, when he was 25 years old. It's famously mentioned that he traded for that camera for a bag of margarine. His photography journey would then commence, and he began to document the world, mainly working in black and white, working numerous photo jobs, and eventually finding his breakthrough moment in 1946 with his first feature article, Returning Prisoners of War. These photos were taken at a Vienna railway station. Haas documented the emotions that ran through the crowd as 600 Austrian soldiers returned home after they were imprisoned by the Soviet Union. A clash of emotions, so vividly portrayed in his images, perhaps none more so than this one. You can see this returning soldier. He has this full grin on his face, and it's strikingly contrasted by this worried woman who holds up a photo of what might be her son, in hopes for someone to recognize his face. It's such a powerful image, and there's no question why his work from this assignment got himself the attention of other renowned photographers, most notably American photographer Robert Capa, who would eventually offer Haas his own personal invitation to join the newly created photographic cooperative Magnum Photos and become its vice president in the US. It's so interesting looking at this early work. It's very different than what we would actually, associate with his work. The more colorful, abstract work. For one, it's black and white, and it's a lot more journalistic. I think we can take away a lesson right there in that being an artist involves change. There's no need to stick to a particular style and approach and have that your entire photographic career. Moving to the US at the time that Haas did was no simple procedure, but being appointed vice president of Magnum Photos, it really helped accelerate the process and make it a lot easier for him to move to the US. There, he began a new life in New York City in 1951. Street photography was already a very developed genre of photography in New York, and black and white photography was a staple signature look of this kind of documentary work of everyday life. No one would use color film for this kind of work. But Haas was one of the very few who did experiment with color on the street. And as you can imagine, that brought a lot more eyes and opinions, good and bad, about his work. This book specifically chronicles that journey of experimentation with color, but also how he navigated life in New York. There's a sense of discovery in the work he created in New York City, and it shows that he saw so much beauty in the city, but also realized its flaws. The grittiness, the harsh realities of life in the city. It's all depicted in the subject matter he chose to photograph. And I guess that's what ultimately made him truly a New York photographer. One of my most cherished moments was opening the refrigerator to find it jam-packed, row upon row of orange boxes of Kodachrome film. Not an ounce of food to be found. There was no doubt what my father did for a living. Haas's use of color photography would inevitably change the entire photographic landscape. But it wasn't just his color work that made him so unique as a photographer. It was also his extraordinary, beautiful, and complex way of seeing the world. What made Haas's work so unique, but also draw criticism, was the absence of a clear message in his photography. This was during an era when photographers shot with black and white to tell a certain social message. Haas took a different approach. He shot in color, but also didn't have any specific message he wanted to say in his work. He allowed the viewers to interpret his images in their own way. Nonetheless, he was still documenting, albeit in a more subjective manner. Bored with obvious reality, I find my fascination in transforming it into a subjective point of view. Without touching my subject, I want to come to the moment when, through pure concentration of seeing, the composed picture becomes more made than taken. Without a descriptive caption to justify its existence, it will speak for itself. Less descriptive, more creative, less informative, more suggestive. Less prose, more poetry. Haas's approach to photography in the city was very different than other photographers. He often shot from a distance, opting for a tighter field of view, which he used long telephoto lenses for. I found New York fabulous, not only for its shops, theater, music, museums, but as a city of glass abounding with reflections. The soul of the city seems to be the accumulated art of its reflections. Reflections are a common theme in Ernst Haas's work. It represents the convergence of documentary and abstraction in its most authentic form. He skillfully created beautiful compositions using reflections, took advantage of their color and light, but more than that, he contextualized the surrounding street scenes through these reflections. This method was akin to photographing through some augmented reality. If you've been following my own work for some time, you can probably tell by now where I got my inspiration to photograph as many reflections as I do. Reflections, among other themes like torn posters, found objects, and taxicabs, all became part of Haas's vocabulary. They became pieces of the world he was beginning to build around him. Haas mainly shot with Kodachrome color film, and that's a very slow speed film, which is another reason why a lot of photographers at the time wouldn't use that film to, photograph the street. It was virtually impossible to nail, focus, photograph a moving object in detail with that speed of a film. But rather than looking at it as a shortcoming, Haas welcomed that, and he used it to his advantage. He created a new theme in his work, one of motion, something he fully embraced in his work, and something he would also become distinctly known for. Motion blur is a relatively easy technique to incorporate in your own work. I've made videos on the subject matter many times already. Haas was a master at it, and probably one of the earliest pioneers of using it in a street photography setting. Needing to use a slow shutter speed to compensate for the film's speed, he created this motion blur effect, and it encapsulates this fast-paced way of life that is living in New York City. This is a very famous photo of his that uses this technique. As these people wait to cross the street, a splash of yellow from this taxi cab zooms by, and it's contrasted by the red on the bus in the background. There are notable layers in this image that make you feel like you're right there in this bustling city. It's surreal, dreamlike, literal and non-literal at the same time. Haas would go on to build a very extensive body of work that used motion blur, expanding it from the streets of New York to even the American West. The blurred strokes of motion are paint-like. It's as if he was truly painting with his camera. Motion blur and reflections are some of the magical ways Haas was able to blend documentary with abstraction. While photographers sought stories with their images, he pursued feelings. As he once emphasized, color is not necessarily the main subject matter of his work. Not in a direct sense, that is. He utilized color as a tool to inject subjectivity into his work. It served as a means to create this visual poetry. There was a time when I believed that street photography had to conform to a certain standard. I thought it needed to have a specific appearance, and if my photos didn't meet those expectations, I was doing something wrong. Haas's work is always a reminder to myself that there isn't just one way of doing things. There isn't one way of seeing. If you consider yourself an artist in any way, what we do is technically always going to be subjective. There is no right or wrong. There are no rules. You can create them for yourself, but you can never create it for another person. The camera is such a powerful tool because you can create the world you want to create, and no one can stop you from doing that. While Haas is well known for his beautiful imagery, it's his determination to express himself freely, unconstrained by societal norms of what art should be, that I find most inspirational. He bridged the gap between photojournalism and self-expressive art, expanding the possibilities of what photography could be. A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. I've been a Squarespace user for the last 7 years, using it as a professional space for my favorite works, as well as an e-commerce store to help fund my business as a solo photographer and YouTube creator. You don't need any prior website design knowledge to get yourself started. They have several easy-to-use templates, as well as the ability to truly customize your website to your own tastes. If it sounds interesting to you, you can try them out for free by visiting squarespace.com/Faizal, and make sure to use the code Faizal at checkout to get 10% off your first purchase.